Today we're diving into the world of plant-based diets and their potential impacts on cardiovascular health and cancer risk.
Plant-based diets are gaining popularity, but there are lots of questions about them.
We're using a 2024 Umbrella Review as our source.
It was published in PLOS 1 and titled Cardiovascular Health and Cancer Risk Associated with Plant-Based Diets, an umbrella review.
This review looked at tons of studies from the last 2 decades.
It really focused on the impact of vegetarian and vegan diets.
The key finding is that plant-based diets have positive effects on cardiovascular health.
And a reduced risk of some cancers, too.
This review is super comprehensive.
It looked at cholesterol levels, blood pressure, body mass index, glucose metabolism,
And cardiovascular events, pregnancy outcomes.
even cancer risk and mortality from cardiovascular disease and cancer.
Let's break it down starting with cholesterol.
The review consistently showed that vegetarians had lower total and LDL cholesterol.
That's compared to omnivores.
Lowering LDL cholesterol is key to reducing heart disease risk.
The results for HDL cholesterol and triglycerides were less consistent.
But the connection between plant-based diets and lower LDL cholesterol is still important.
The review also looked at blood pressure,
It found a connection between plant-based diets and lower blood pressure.
but the results varied across studies.
More research is needed there.
For those focused on weight management, the review found that vegetarians and vegans generally had a lower BMI than omnivores.
This doesn't guarantee weight loss.
But it's an interesting connection.
Definitely.
Moving on to glucose metabolism and diabetes, the review found that vegetarians had better glucose control
This was shown by lower HbA1c and fasting glucose levels.
and a lower risk of type 2 diabetes.
The review also looked at cardiovascular events.
This is a big concern for lots of people.
The review found a much lower risk of ischemic heart disease.
For people following plant-based diets.
The risk of stroke was also lower.
But the findings for stroke were less consistent.
The review found a lower overall cancer incidence in vegetarians compared to omnivores,
This included a reduced risk for many cancers,
like prostate, colorectal, liver, pancreatic, lung, bladder, and kidney cancers.
as well as melanoma and non-Hodgkin lymphoma.
They even found that vegetarians had a lower risk of developing proximal colon cancer.
That's a specific subtype of colon cancer.
The review also looked at pregnant women,
It found lower zinc levels in those following vegetarian diets.
but no adverse pregnancy outcomes or increased risk of low birth weight.
The review also addressed mortality
Vegetarian diets were linked to a reduced risk of death from ischemic heart disease.
and possibly other circulatory diseases,
For vegans, they found a decreased risk of overall cancer incidence.
but not specifically mortality.
More research is needed there.
It's important to talk about the review's limitations.
Every review has limitations,
Umbrella reviews rely on the quality of the studies they include.
and those can vary a lot,
The PLOS 1 review acknowledged that the studies it analyzed were very different.
making it hard to pinpoint the impact of diet alone.
The studies varied in sample size, participant demographics, specific dietary patterns, and other lifestyle factors,
Lots of them rely on self-reported data, too.
which can be inaccurate.
Absolutely. Let's dig into some specific studies from the review to really see the impact of plant-based diets on cholesterol levels.
Sounds good.
One study with over 5,500 participants found a big reduction in total cholesterol for those on a vegetarian diet.
That's a lot of people.
Another study looked at plant-based protein and saw an 11% drop in total cholesterol.
So eating more plant-based protein can help manage cholesterol.
It seems so, especially for people with a BMI between 18.5 and 30.
So those in a healthy weight range or slightly overweight.
Right, they saw the biggest cholesterol improvements.
What about HDL cholesterol?
It's a mixed bag. One study with over 6,000 vegetarians found a small decrease in HDL compared to omnivores.
But what about other studies?
Some found no real difference.
So we need more research on HDL?
We do, but the evidence for LDL cholesterol is much stronger.
That's the bad cholesterol.
Exactly. 7 studies consistently showed a drop in LDL cholesterol in vegetarians.
Plant-based diets really seem to lower LDL.
They do. One study had almost 800 overweight and obese participants follow a vegetarian diet.
What happened?
Their LDL cholesterol plummeted 31%.
Wow, that's huge.
This was consistent across studies of both general populations and people with diabetes.
So it seems like plant-based diets are good for LDL cholesterol no matter who you are.
What about vegans specifically?
Good question.
4 reviews showed that vegans also saw a significant reduction in LDL cholesterol compared to omnivores.
And one of those reviews had some really impressive results.
It did. It involved over 3,000 vegans and reported an almost 50% reduction in LDL.
That's amazing. Plant-based diets seem very promising for managing cholesterol.
They do. Triglycerides are trickier, though. Some studies showed lower levels in vegetarians.
But others didn't.
Right. Some found no change or even a slight increase.
What about the review with over 4,000 vegetarians?
They found an overall reduction in triglycerides.
So maybe there's something there.
Maybe. More research is needed on triglycerides and plant-based diets, though.
Let's move on to inflammation.
The TLOSPEN review also looked at that.
What does it find?
3 studies found lower C-reactive protein levels in vegetarian and compared to non-vegetarians.
And CRP is a marker of inflammation,
It is. These findings suggest plant-based diets might reduce inflammation.
which could explain some of the health benefits we see.
One study with almost 3,000 obese people found a significant CRP reduction in those on a vegetarian diet.
And there's more evidence for vegans?
Right. One study focused on vegans also reported a big decrease in CRP.
So both vegetarian and vegan diets may have anti-inflammatory properties.
That seems to be the case. The review also looked at studies of mixed vegetarian diets.
Without distinguishing between subtypes.
Yes.
What did those studies find?
One found a significant CRP reduction in obese participants.
But there was a catch.
Another study found that effect only in those who had been vegetarian for at least 2 years.
So the length of time on the diet might matter.
It might. We need more research on the long-term effects of mixed vegetarian diets.
What about blood pressure?
Several studies looked at that. Some found lower systolic blood pressure in vegetarians.
Compared to the general population?
Yes, but some studies didn't find a connection.
It seems like the results are mixed.
They are. One study found a reduction of over 5 millimeter Hg in systolic blood pressure in ovo-lacto-vegetarians.
That's a pretty good drop.
It is, and another study found a smaller reduction in those following general vegetarian diets.
So it might depend on the specific type of vegetarian diet.
Possibly, but then a massive study with over 17,000 people didn't find any significant reduction in systolic blood pressure among vegetarians.
So there's no clear answer yet.
Not yet. We need more research on plant-based diets and systolic blood pressure.
And what about diastolic blood pressure?
The findings there are mixed too.
Some studies showed lower levels in vegetarians and others didn't.
Right. It's a similar situation to systolic blood pressure.
Let's talk about body weight and BMI now.
One review looked at 40 observational studies comparing weight between vegetarians and non-vegetarians.
40 studies is a lot.
It is. 29 of those 40 studies found vegetarians had consistently lower weight and BMI.
So the majority of studies showed a difference.
They did. This was especially noticeable in women. Vegetarian women were 6 to 17% lighter.
And had a 15% lower BMI.
Exactly. Men showed a similar trend.
What about kids?
One review focused on children.
Yeah.
It found no real weight difference between vegetarian or vegan kids and omnivores.
So maybe the weight benefits of plant-based diets are more for adults?
That could be the case.
What about meta-analyses?
A large one with over 57,000 vegetarians found a statistically significant BMI reduction in those on a vegetarian diet.
Compared to omnivores?
Yes. And a couple of studies specifically on vegans found a lower BMI in that group too.
Interesting. But correlation isn't causation.
Exactly. These findings suggest a link between plant-based diets and lower BMI.
But we don't know if the diet itself causes weight loss.
Or if something else is at play.
What about glucose metabolism?
One study looked at both HbA1c and fasting glucose levels. It found significant reductions in both for vegetarians.
So better glucose control.
And potentially a lower risk of type 2 diabetes.
What about vegans?
One review on fasting blood glucose found a small reduction in vegans.
Compared to omnivores?
Yes, but only 83 vegans were in that analysis versus 125 omnivores.
That's a pretty small sample size.
It is. We need larger studies to confirm those findings in vegans.
What about mixed vegetarian diets?
One review found lower fasting plasma glucose and a lower type 2 diabetes risk with those diets too.
So it seems like any type of plant-based diet could be good for glucose metabolism.
And diabetes risk. Now, let's talk about cardiovascular events.
This is a major health concern?
One meta-analysis found a much lower risk of ischemic heart disease in vegetarians.
But no difference in cerebrovascular mortality.
Right. Another review looked at various cardiovascular diseases.
What did it find?
Only a few studies showed a lower risk for vegetarians.
Compared to omnivores?
Yes. More consistent data is needed there.
What about that large meta-analysis with over 840,000 participants?
That one found a lower risk of both cardiovascular disease and ischemic heart disease for vegetarians.
And stroke?
It found a lower stroke risk, too.
But it wasn't statistically significant.
Right. That analysis also included vegans.
Uh-huh.
It found a lower risk of ischemic heart disease in that group, too.
So the benefits extend to vegans as well.
Another meta-analysis specifically on stroke found a lower incidence of total stroke in vegetarians.
Compared to non-vegetarians.
But it didn't find a difference in the risk of incident stroke.
So more research is needed there.
There is. A couple of other reviews suggested that plant-based diets could be good for preventing and managing heart disease.
Especially if adopted early in life.
Now let's discuss cancer risk. The PLOS1 review had some interesting findings there.
Like what?
One large meta-analysis used data from the UK Biobank study.
That's a huge study.
Over 400,000 people, they found a lower risk of several cancers in vegetarians.
Which ones?
Liver, pancreatic, lung, prostate, bladder, colorectal, melanoma, kidney, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and lymphatic cancer.
That's a long list.
It is, even after adjusting for things like lifestyle and BMR.
The association stayed strong.
For prostate, colorectal, and overall cancer risk.
So there's a possible link between vegetarian diets and lower cancer risk.
Another meta-analysis with over 124,000 participants found the same thing.
Lower overall cancer incidence in vegetarians.
Exactly. And one meta-analysis focused specifically on digestive system cancers.
Yeah.
It found a lower risk for both those on plant-based diets and those on a vegan diet.
What about other reviews?
One looked at various cancer types. It found a lower risk of overall and colorectal cancer in vegetarians.
But what about prostate and breast cancer?
Inconsistent results there.
Okay.
Another review focused on prostate cancer specifically. It found a lower risk for both vegetarians and vegan.
And for pancreatic cancer?
One umbrella review found a lower risk for that one too.
It really seems like plant-based diets might protect against certain cancers.
More research is needed to fully understand this.
Of course. Now let's talk about mortality outcomes.
One meta-analysis found vegetarians had a significantly lower risk of death from ischemic heart disease and circulatory diseases.
But no difference for death from cerebrovascular diseases.
Correct. Another large review looked at mortality from all sorts of causes.
And?
It reported a 25% lower risk of death from ischemic heart disease in vegetarians.
What about other cardiovascular diseases or cancers?
No significant differences there.
But what about vegans?
This review found no difference in overall mortality for vegans.
Or something else stood out?
They did find lower overall cancer incidence in vegans.
So vegan diets might protect against cancer, but we need more research on mortality.
We do. Now it's important to remember these studies have limitations.
Like what?
Many relied on self-reported diet data.
Which can be inaccurate.
It makes it tough to separate the effects of diet from other lifestyle factors.
Even with these limitations, the evidence suggests plant-based diets have a lot of potential health benefits.
Particularly for cardiovascular health and cancer risk.
The review also highlighted the importance of looking at subtypes within dietary categories.
One study did that with colon cancer.
What does it find?
Vegetarians had a lower risk of proximal colon cancer.
So the benefits might depend on the specific type of cancer.
This field is complex, and we need more detailed research.
The PLOS1 review assessed the quality of the studies it included using the AMSTAR tool.
The average quality score was 28, which is considered mean quality.
But its good chunk scored between 60% and 90%.
That means good to very good quality.
So while the average was moderate, a good number of studies were well done.
There were some issues, though.
Like what?
Many studies didn't provide info on the scientific quality of the studies they included.
Almost 40% didn't say if they had assessed the quality of the studies they used.
That's a problem.
And another issue was publication bias,
Over 37% of the reviews didn't analyze that.
which could skew the results.
These reporting limitations are worrying.
They raise questions about how strong the evidence really is.
We need more transparency and better research in the future.
The PLOS1 review itself also has limitations.
It's limited by the quality of the studies it includes.
And we already talked about how some of those studies had issues.
Umbrella reviews can also miss new associations.
Ones that haven't been covered in past reviews,
The PLOS1 review acknowledged that the studies it analyzed were very different.
making it hard to be sure about the specific effects of plant-based diets.
The studies varied in sample size participant demographics, specific dietary patterns, and other lifestyle factors.
It's tough to isolate the impact of diet alone.
And many studies used self-reported data, which we know can be iffy.
The review also mentioned that cancer risk studies had problems with timing.
Variations in when oncological evaluations were done, disease progression, histological subtypes, previous or current treatments, all made it tricky.
It's hard to make solid conclusions about plant-based diets and cancer risk with all those variables.
Most studies were done in Western countries, too.
So the findings might not apply to other populations.
With different diets and cultures, the authors stress the need for better research
With standardized methods.
to get more definitive answers about the long-term effects of plant-based diets and the best ways to approach them,
It's important to consider individual needs and potential risks, too.
especially with restrictive diets,
People should talk to their doctors.
to make sure a plant-based diet is right for them.
The review focused on reducing or eliminating animal products.
But the quality of the plant foods matters, too.
A plant-based diet full of processed food won't be as beneficial.
As one rich in whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, and nuts.
Variety is key
And some people might need supplements,
for nutrients that are hard to get from plant sources.
like vitamin B12.
Despite the limitations, this deep dive shows lots of evidence for the health benefits of plant-based diets.
The volume and consistency of the findings are impressive.
These diets could really help people be healthier.
More research is needed, but what we have now is encouraging.
It makes us think about what we eat and how we can include more plant-based foods,
In the last part of this deep dive, we'll talk about the big picture.
and explore future research directions for plant-based diets. So as we wrap up our look at plant-based diets and how they affect our health, let's talk about the bigger picture.
All the evidence we've looked at suggests that if more people ate plant-based, it could have a big impact on public health,
If people switch to plant-based diets, we could see fewer cases of chronic diseases.
like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers.
These diseases are a huge burden on individuals
Not just individuals, but healthcare systems, too.
and on economies worldwide,
Think about the good that could be done if we could prevent or delay these diseases.
just by changing what we eat.
The PLS1 review also highlighted potential benefits for pregnant women.
And their babies.
It's really interesting. Even though vegetarian mothers had lower zinc levels,
They didn't experience any negative pregnancy outcomes or have babies with lower birth weights.
that's reassuring for women who are thinking about plant-based diets during pregnancy.
Though we still need more research to fully understand their specific nutritional needs.
Of course.
Now I think it's time to talk about some exciting new research in this field.
One promising area is the gut microbiome.
You mean those trillions of bacteria that live in our intestines?
Right. They play a huge role in our overall health.
And there's growing evidence that plant-based diets can affect the gut microbiome
That's right. It can change its makeup and how it works.
and potentially improve health.
Some studies show that vegetarians and vegans have a more diverse gut microbiome than omnivores,
And we know that diversity is linked to good things.
like better digestion, stronger immune function, and less inflammation.
But we need more research to really understand the link between plant-based diets, the gut microbiome, and how they affect our health.
Another area that's super interesting is personalized nutrition.
What is that?
It means tailoring dietary advice to each person's individual needs and preferences.
So not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
Because everyone reacts differently to diet changes.
Right, and now with advances in genetics and technology, it's becoming possible to make recommendations based on an individual's genes and goals.
That's incredible.
It could revolutionize how we think about plant-based diets.
Imagine getting specific guidance on what plant foods to eat based on your DNA and health goals.
That kind of personalized approach could really maximize the benefits of plant-based diets while minimizing risks.
So as we finish this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought.
We've spent this episode exploring tons of evidence that plant-based diets can make a real difference to your health.
And knowing all this information is great.
But it's only useful if we actually use it.
So think about how you can add more plant-based foods to your diet.
Start small, try new recipes, explore different plant-based cuisines.
Even small changes can make a difference.
You don't have to go vegan overnight to get benefits.
Every step you take toward a more plant-focused way of eating brings you closer to a healthier and more vibrant you.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of plant-based diets.
We hope it inspires you to try new things in the kitchen and on your plate and discover a new level of well-being.